Hi, I'm Norma Goodwin, Vice President of Emerging Biotech Business Development here at Indegene. I'm excited to be here today with Dave Lennon to discuss his experiences navigating global market complexities, including strategies for patient-centric success, growth, and innovation in pharma. Dave is the President and CEO of Aadi Bioscience, a precision oncology company developing therapies for cancers and mTOR pathway alterations. With over 20 years of experience in biotechnology and pharmaceuticals, Dr. Lennon previously served as CEO of Satellite Bio, a regenerative medicine company, and as president of Novartis Gene Therapies, where he held leadership roles in oncology and across global markets. Dr. Lennon holds a PhD in molecular medicine from Cornell and a BA in biophysics from Columbia. Welcome aboard, Dave.
Oh, thank you, Norma. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you to Indegene for hosting today.
So let's get started. You've always been one of the few senior leaders who have been open to adopting newer technologies and innovative operative models across R&D and commercialization. For example, you took on China and Japan early in your marketing career. You took on marketing challenges such as the industry's first major gene therapy. You ventured into tissue therapy, and now you're CEO of Aadi. Where do you get your motivation? What drives you to stay ahead of the curve?
Well, I don't know if I stay ahead of the curve all the time. I think part of my journey as a leader and in leading different businesses across has always been searching for what are the most interesting problems that we have to solve, what are the biggest unmet needs for patients, and then really thinking about how do we apply new technologies in those spaces and to bring new solutions. And that can be new solutions in terms of new therapeutic modalities, but also can be new approaches using technology that allow us to reach customers differently or reach patients differently. My goal has never been to be necessarily at the cutting edge in terms of technology, because I think that can lead us into places where we don't necessarily are maybe or potentially developing solutions that won't be useful to folks. So I really rather focus on what are the most interesting problems, and then how can we bring technology to those. I guess that's how I stay ahead of the curve. I don't know if I'm always ahead of the curve or not, but that's my approach anyway.
I think it's been working for you. Given your extensive experience across different geographies, I mentioned China and Japan, could you share your insights into the evolving commercial landscape?
Well, it's a really, the interesting thing about technology and therapeutics these days is the acceleration of access to all available technologies around the world. And so what you're really seeing today, where even 10 years ago, when I was working in China, there was still a market that was heavily dependent on what I would call the previous generation technologies, and those were the therapeutics in the marketplace. But today, what you're seeing is, development of different market world and popping places where you wouldn't necessarily think about innovation in the past. And I think that leads to a market where technology and application of technology is occurring all over the world, and in ways that are quite sometimes difficult to grasp from a complexity perspective.
So, talking about technology and other issues, how do factors such as data accessibility, regulatory environments, and patient preferences shape product launch strategies in key markets?
Well, it's a big question, of course, and I think fundamentally everything is anchored on when you think about product launch in particular, everything gets anchored on what is that unmet patient need that exists within that marketplace. Generally, that's going to be pretty similar across different markets, but always there's nuance around what's the standard of care, what's the application of that healthcare system, and then what's the regulatory environment, and including reimbursement and access that exist within those individual markets. And often, the things that are shaping us today are navigation of that care rather than the fundamental need, which I think is pretty universal across markets in terms of what patients or our customers, physicians are looking for. But it's that application and managing the nuance that becomes really the challenge when you think about individual market strategies for launch.
So what are your critical success factors for adapting to the diverse market dynamics?
Well, I think I always try to think about the cross section between the demographics of the population and customers you're trying to address, and how that intersects with individual patient and physician journeys as you think about how people are going to adopt your product. It's often easy to say, well, doctors look like this, or there's a group that looks like this. But the reality is that each patient and each physician experience is individual. And I think one of the advantages of technology is the ability to marry kind of that big picture view of what does the market look overall, but with those individual patient journeys and physician journeys to understand what adoption is really going to look like. What does awareness look like? What does the consideration of your product look like, both for the patient and the physician? And then what is actually the delivery of that message potentially, and that decision to get prescription look like? And then downstream of that, especially when we talk about complex medicines like we are launching these days, what is actually the experience of the patient and physician downstream of administration of a thing like a gene therapy or like a CAR T cell that are unique to those aspects of those types of therapies. And so critical success factors start with, one, the ability to look at that intersection. The second then is the agility to address different segments of the business and ensuring that you can win the first places you need to win, which are early adopters of your therapy and the places that are going to matter to the influence over time. Today, we exist in a market where, to the extent we can, social media and aspects of how physicians and patients communicate these days play actually a much bigger role than traditional promotion has in the past. And our ability actually to enable those systems to understand how they work within different marketplaces, whether that's by country or within different physician and patient groups that we are looking to address. So understanding how actually the product is actually going to be a community, and what role social and other types of engagement play now is much more important than it used to be, and certainly a critical success factor for launch. And then, finally, it's really getting that resource balance right. That how do you then deploy resources and approaches in a multi-channel setting, in a marketing strategy, a sales strategy, and a reimbursement and market access strategy that allows you actually to address the market holistically and win and build on your business over time.
That's great. So let's shift from different and diverse geographies to therapeutic areas. So your career has spanned a wide range of therapeutic areas, from mass markets to rare diseases. How do you ensure a consistent patient-centric approach across the diverse portfolios?
It's a great question, because patient centricity has been around as long as I've been in the marketplace, and I still think everyone thinks we're the most patient-centric organization. I don't know who's the best or who's not, but at the end of the day, again, and this requires a flexibility and understanding and a willingness to actually have the difficult discussion about what is the intersection of patient centricity with the real economics of our business and what we're actually trying to drive. And I'm one of those people who very much believes in patient centricity. I like to think about it as a commitment to making sure patients who deserve the therapies we have get the therapies we have. But we also must hold that in connection with what are really the economics of the business and the economics of individual patient accumulation on therapy. And importantly, when you think about that diversity across, say, different therapeutic areas, the reality is that in some areas, an individual patient acquisition, individual physician acquisition in your system is going to be worth more than in other areas. And how we then deploy against those different scenarios economically, along with consistently having that patient commitment, just looks different depending on kind of how those things intersect.
So in that vein, what strategies have you employed to understand and address the unique needs of patients across the different therapeutic areas?
Well, again, I think, I'll go back to that intersection I was talking about between, demographics and patient journey. And I think part of that is, really understanding what is that patient experience going to be? What is the individual, let's say, John or Jane in this scenario going to experience over the course of disease journey. And I think a lot of us, focus on that moment of decision, but there's years that occur before that. There's years that occur after that for an individual patient. And as we think about I think first understanding what are those journeys that actually happen today, and then aligning that to what I like to call the golden journey. So what is the best journey someone could potentially have with given the considerations for their disease? Obviously, this is not always just a positive journey. It's often quite a negative journey, and understanding what's the best possible outcomes we can achieve for patients at each step. What's the gaps between what patients are really experiencing, what that best possible journey is, allows us to identify areas where we can potentially intervene and create kind of a virtuous journey for everybody in the space to the best of our ability in that shaping. And I think that understanding that golden or virtuous journey is really important, and then identifying those gaps allows you to create a space for innovation about how you might then address that.
The golden journey. That's a great, a great way to remember it. So we talked about your experiences across different geographies, across different therapeutic areas. Let's talk about your experiences in both large pharma and smaller biotech settings. How have you approached resource allocation and strategy development in these different environments?
Yeah, that's a great question. And sorry, I almost interrupted you before because I wanted to remember it's Golden Week in China. So that's a way to remember it this week.
Okay.
So, yeah. So your question was about resource allocation around these?
It was about how you approach resource allocation and strategy development in large pharma versus smaller biotech.
Versus small. Yeah, it's a great question. Obviously, first and fundamentally, I think you want to have the same depth of understanding of marketplace. And I think part of the advantage in big pharma always is the ability to have more resources. But with that comes greater expectations quite often of what surrounds that. And obviously in a biotech, less resources, I don't think any lower expectations, but maybe differentially an understanding of kind of the limitations that may exist there. I think the fundamentals are the same for each type of market in terms of understanding, or each business in terms of understanding. We really need to invest to understand it. And the leverage you generate from that level of understanding is huge. And so I never try to skimp in resource allocation to understanding the marketplace, because the ability to generate return on that kind of insight, or on the insight that's going to make a difference for your business, is really fundamentally the same, whether you're in a biotech or whether you're in a large pharma. Really, the question then becomes deployment of resources to go after each of those opportunities. And obviously, in a biotech setting, you're really focusing on where you can make the most wins the quickest, as opposed to potentially a longer-term strategy in a big pharma where you have potentially the resources not to waste, but to invest in the future, and in the future in a different way.
That's a really good.
At the same time, I think the fundamental core of what you're trying to do is the same. And I think where sometimes big pharma can get lost in the forest for the trees, because there are so much insight, so much information coming in, and access to deployment of resources, that the key for big pharma leaders is really to say, how do I cut through that and really make sure that I understand the intersection of that journey and the demographics and where it's going to make a difference. And I think in biotech, it's not forgetting opportunities for lack of investment. It's really finding out innovative ways to continue to stretch yourself to find those new opportunities, and not be afraid to take the risks that are necessary to grow the business, and not use limitation of resources as an excuse for not achieving the most for that product and those patients.
Yeah, that really resonates with me, having spent I'll say several decades at a big pharma company, and then coming to Indegene and really focusing on the emerging or smaller biotechs. I think the points that you just raised are very true for sure. So what are the key levers for driving growth and maximizing impact, regardless of company size or resources? You talked about one, but are there others?
Well, I think, part of the activity of resource deployment is understanding that dynamics of business. I always like to start with the concept of kind of winning the big ones, right? And so I think part of like the first, key is making sure your resource deployment is married up with that opportunity to win. Either if you're in an account-based setting, win the big accounts, winning the big physicians, if you're in that physician type model, or winning big indication approaches or whatever that is. And I think part of the key success of any product to be leading is to win in the big places and win where it matters, the places that are going to be most influential. So winning where it matters starts, as a key success factor in my mind. I think the second thing or third thing, if we're going along, is the agility, right? And I think what happens a lot of times is that people build up brand plans over years prior to a launch, locked and loaded and ready to go. And then things start to happen in the marketplace. Failure starts to happen in different segments. And what you often see is a very slow reaction to the dynamics of a launch that lead to an inability really to change the curve or leverage those early days, which are so important to any launch of any product. And so agility in that time, I always like to think, what's your reserve, right? Who's on the bench, or what ideas are on the bench that you're going to bring forward that you don't have, but you're really excited about if you had that opportunity, or you see, something negative happening that you want to bring forward. It's almost like, how are you managing the game, if you want to think about it that way, as a sports analogy. And I think that component of being ready to adapt is just so important to how we think about this. It's never exactly how you think it's going to be. And if you're not ready to make a change, then you're probably going to miss an opportunity down the road. And that's where I think many launch plans go off track.
Yeah, and the timing for launch is so critical. Every day a launch is delayed costs millions on the back end. So
yeah. We fall in love with our ideas, right? I mean,
yeah, for sure.
I think
for sure.
if you've been working on something for a long time, you definitely fall in love with the way you do it, right? And I think part of being good about leadership is recognizing that more than likely you're going to be wrong about something, and listening to the marketplace, listening to the people around you, listening to outside experts, getting kind of that objective view, and maybe not experts, but just outside new people coming into a situation is really important to make those adjustments.
Definitely. So I think what you're saying really sort of ties to general management and leadership skills. So can you share with us how you have adapted over the years your general management and leadership skills across your 25 years of career? What are some of the themes that emerged in your leadership style?
Yeah, well, it's a work in progress, I can tell you that. So for whatever it's worth, I'm at a point where I am, but I'm still growing and learning every day. And I think we all have to be, because the market's changing all the time. A couple things that emerged for me, as you mentioned, I did get to work in various markets around the world. And certainly as American born and raised and trained individual going into European settings, or going into Japanese or Chinese settings, I think there are some universal truths about human behavior. People want to be heard, they want to be cared for, and they want to have impact. And I think that those things are pretty universal across different markets. And if you understand that and are willing to listen to like what that is for the teams that you're working with around the world, and we, even within, different organizations within a biotech or within a large pharma, that's fundamental to start the perspective. I always think that is to making sure that you can lead effectively and agilely in different types of settings, even with the same team over time. So that's one thing I kind of rely on within my leadership style. I think the second thing is understanding where you have impact as a person and where you don't. And I do try to really make sure that I empower folks to be the experts that they are, or be the problem solvers that they are in the areas where they can contribute. And I let people know where I think I can contribute and where I want to contribute to the team and the organization that we're trying to run. And then I think the third thing for me that's important is really thinking about how, as an individual leader, you're in service of the organization, making sure that the organization is not in service of you. And so this can be described a couple different ways. One way I like to think about it is flipping the organizational chart on its head and putting yourself at the bottom, and thinking about the people at the end of those spokes who are really at the top of the funnel. And because those are where the interactions with customers are happening. Those are where products are getting made. That's where research is really getting done in the lab. And your ability to actually be in service of all of those people will allow things to happen. Ultimately, you know, I have found, as moving up in different leadership positions, I actually do very little in terms of making real things happen. And part of what we have to make sure occurs is that the people who are responsible for the actual physical work product are enabled and are served well by the CEO and leadership of any organization. So those are some of the themes that I find. I think, of course, there's then the nuances of how do you work in different cultures and different systems. And those are cultures, whether you think about big pharma and biotech, we could talk about that dynamic, or whether you think about you know, differences regionally.
So you talk a lot about teams. Can you share one or two strategies that you use to actually build those teams and maintain high-performing teams?
Yeah, a couple things I like to do. I think the first is kind of what I would call a focus on high performance of individuals within the team. And that's care for not just the competency and the growth of the individual in regards to their career, but really how do you manage yourself day to day, and how do you help manage the team day to day, such that you have the ability and the capacity to deal with the difficult problems that we have out there. And that, you know, like things like, you know, your mindset and how you come and show up to work every day. Are you committed? Are you able to focus within that? And what does that look like for you? What does it mean for like recovery? You know, are we going 24/7 all the time, or are we actually building in a consistent team ability to take recovery as a really important factor as part of how we deliver the most of ourselves? How do you think about simple things like nutrition, exercise, and the things that actually allow us to fully perform as individuals? I think in the era of Zoom, I spend more time sitting and staring at a screen than I would ever have thought imaginable. And, you know, the ability to get up and walk away for a while. And I think of exercise more as just not exercise, but movement, like just getting those kind of things going helps your brain. We know that gross movement. So I think there's that component of like, how do you make a team function and have that capacity overall? And how are you as a leader providing those opportunities and encouraging that with amongst your team? You know, and I think the second thing on a team building basis is really thinking about individual contributions and individual growth for each of your teams. What does that look like? What are the, you know, we always do kind of styles awareness training within our teams and making sure people understand how they're going to work together. But then also, what is the individual goal for impact that they have? You know, some people say, listen, I just want to use my expertise, deliver on the job that I'm here for. And that's great. I love people like that. And I love people who just say, that's what I want to do. And find the, you know, fitting that role perfectly. And then you have people who say, listen, I want to be a CEO someday, so help me grow and do that, right? Or some people say, I want to have this kind of impact with patients, and that's where I want to work. And that's how I want to. And I think figuring out the variance within your team around each of those topics and what individual goals are, and then making sure that everyone understands, okay, we have a team goal that's aligned, and everyone's individual goals can contribute to that in different ways. You can't satisfy everything everyone wants to do all the time, but certainly I think showing that you care and are developing those connections for people between what your current team goal is and what their individual objectives are is really important to developing team success.
I think that's a really important, oh, sorry. I think that's a really important point about, you know, you can't make everybody happy 100% of the time, but it's definitely, I think, something that we tend to want to do.
Yeah, and I think, you know, part of it's, you know, transparency and authenticity about like, you know, as you're not omniscient and you're not omnipotent as a CEO. And sometimes people think that you could make, you know, wave a magic wand and make certain things happen happen for them, for their career, for the company overall. And I think part of being a good leader is understanding and communicating your own fallibility, your own ability to want to grow and develop, and then transparently telling people, what you can and cannot do for them and for the company overall. And, I think as long as you're authentic about that, people actually understand. Like they're not actually expecting that from you. What they're expecting is that you communicate with truth and honesty, and that you are clear about what you can and can't do, and that's all on that.
That's great. Well, Dave, I want to thank you today for sharing your insights, and I want to thank those who are watching this segment. I hope you enjoyed the session as much as I did and have taken away some key and useful insights. I encourage you all to join additional sessions of our Indegene Digital Summit, as I know we have many interesting and very timely topics. So thank you, Dave, and thank you all.
Thank you, Norma.